Sarah Sutton. I've been in this field for almost 30 years. Some of you might know me or a book I wrote called Is Your Museum Grant Ready? So that's the book that's on your handout. I was Brophy when I wrote that, but so if there's any confusion, that's why. But I went to college and graduate school. I went to graduate school at the College of William and Mary, and on my first day there, I said to my mentor, what's the one thing I need to leave here knowing how to do? And he said, raise money. And I said, pick anything else. It's not what I'm interested in. He said, no, if you want to grow up and be a museum director, you have to raise money. Well, William and Mary had a great program where you always had 2 internships at the same time. So you went to school and you had internships. And I always did one that was fundraising and one that I liked. And by the time I was done, I had a good fundraising background. And then every single job, permanent position I've had since then was because of my fundraising background, not my history or museum administration background. And then when my sons were born, I needed a job that would transfer home, but keep me in the museum field. And with internet, grant writing presented itself as the most portable job. So that's what I started doing. And I found that, you know, when you go to graduate school, the classes for museum studies don't usually include fundraising. You have to learn it someplace else. So even though I had those internships, most of what I've learned is by practicing, by trying, by talking to people, by coming to sessions, by reading, by being a grant reviewer. And all of those things are equally available to everyone else. And this consists of what I've learned and what I keep learning as I go through my grant work. So half of my work as a consultant is grant writing for museums, zoos, gardens, historic site, parks, colleges, learning institutions, usually cultural resource institutions. And the other half of the work is environmental sustainability. Because one of the things you'll hear about in this is that a good grant is designed around a project that earns money, but it achieves more than one goal. More happens with that money, so you get a better return on your investment. And environmental sustainability does exactly that. If I can write a grant to get a new HVAC system installed that's much more energy efficient, then the museum now has more money for collections or education programs. And so that's how I got into the sustainability work, which lo and behold went back to all those things I grew up knowing and loving, which was that I really wanted to take shop class instead of cooking, and that I really would rather be out at the creek or on my horse than going to school. So it's come full circle and made me pretty happy. So we're going to go rather quickly through, I have about 30 slides. There are a couple times during it when we're going to stop and have an activity together. This is our outline for today. And you can get this PowerPoint through Sustainable Heritage Network, or if you want to give me a card, I'll send you a PDF of it as well. So you don't need to feel frantic about taking notes. So these are the topics I'm going to go through today. Finding and choosing the best funder match, which is getting a good start with a good partner. Designing a great project, we'll spend a lot of time on that, because if you don't have a good project, they can't write a check to you, no matter how beautiful your prose is. If you don't qualify, if you don't have a responsible project, you're not going to get a check. How to prove your case, writing to educate and engage, because I find that somebody who is moved and connected to your project, who learned something and is engaged by it, is much quicker to write a check than somebody who just is sort of scanning it and putting it over on the possible pile. And then getting that gosh darn thing in on time, which is its own challenge often. All right, I gotta find my clicker here. Okay, so this is a paradoxical task. There are things in this work that you have control over and things that you don't. There's stuff that you can change, choices that you can make that improve your chances, but you alone cannot make this grant happen. And I think that's important for you to understand, and for people you work with and work around you who might think that you ought to get every grant you apply for, or thinks that you ought to get a particular type of grant that you don't feel you qualify for. So some of the talk that I'll be giving you today will help you understand what you can control and how to educate those around you who don't understand the process as well. And this is what I believe it takes to be a successful proposal writer. And it includes reading those guidelines at least 4 times in the process. Because whatever you start off doing, whatever the project is, it morphs by the time you're finally done writing it and describing it and submitting it. And sometimes it morphs away from what the funder is willing to support, or at least this particular grant deadline is willing to support. So keep reading those proposal guidelines, use a good team, be detail-oriented or find someone who's detail-oriented who can make sure you get those attachments started and completed. And by attachments, I mean all those support papers that are your list of your Board of Governors or your tribal council, or the vote that says that the council endorses this project, or a letter of support from a school teacher. Those are the sorts of things that a grant request will call an attachment and ask you to include. Usually they take longer to prepare than you would like them to, so starting early matters. Being able to do good research on why your project is important, or why an issue is important to your community, is the background for a lot of the work that you'll do and for making a case. But writing is very important, and we'll spend some time talking about that. And then be prepared for 2 valleys of the shadow of death, because they will come into your life while you're in this process. So let's think about the anatomy of a proposal process. Finding the funders over here on the left, and then matching them with a good idea is the very first step. But it feels a little disconnected and, I don't know, more hopeful than productive doing this funder match part. But it's critical for everything that comes afterwards. It's the foundation of the work. Then you design the project with your team, and then you submit either a letter of inquiry or a proposal. And a letter of inquiry is what they've developed more recently to be that very short summary of your project that you submit so the foundation or the government agency can look at it and make sure you're in the right place, asking for the right kind of project that they're willing to fund. And if you pass that test, they'll invite a full proposal. They don't want you to spend so much time and effort on something they weren't going to fund anyway, so they want to stop you ahead of time. Also saves them all the time of reading a full proposal, going through that whole process. So you'll submit a letter of inquiry or a proposal. You'll wait an incredibly long time in order to get a response. Then you'll get some sort of response about either yes or no, you got the award. And then you can either start your project, or as we'll talk about, you can call the funder up and ask for some information about what to do better next time if you got a no on your proposal. So as we think about why and how funders give money, raise your hand if you can think of a funder you'd like to ask for money from, if you know of one right now. Other people suspect, they know some funders are out there and they don't know if they want to ask them. So we want to talk about how to find those funders. All right, so it isn't a secret, but it feels like a secret. The funders give away money, which we find hard to imagine. They give away money because they're part of either a agency that's designed to give away money by law, or they're a charitable organization. They've formed a foundation or a part of a foundation where by law they have to give away 5% of the income that comes from the investment of that money. So they've put it into some sort of investment account, and it makes $1 million perhaps, and then they have to find ways to give away 5% of that every year to remain a charitable institution. The money they give into that foundation, they don't have to pay tax on. And that's why they like being able to have a place to put their money. They don't have to spend tax on it, and they can share it with the public. So they're going to give away their money. And in self-defense or by law, they create guidelines for us to understand how they're going to give away that money. Otherwise, if there were no guidelines, we'd all ask for things that were not necessarily what they were interested in. So they create guidelines and tell you what is most important to them, what types of work they want to fund, whether it's a project or overhead, whether they want to fund educational programs or building buildings. These will all be in the guidelines. And they tell you which things are most important. Do they want to educate tribal children? Do they want to send kids to college? Do they want to restore wetlands? Whatever their priorities are, they'll be listed, and then you'll know whether or not that's sort of in your zone, what you're interested in applying for. Now, where do you find them? You find them on donor walls like this one and this one, where somebody who has raised money says thank you, pays tribute to those funders by creating a donor wall, they call it. And they can do it in a straight list or in an artistic form, but that's public information. So every time I go to a zoo, museum, garden, aquarium, historic site, visit a website, I collect the names of those people who were funding those organizations. And it's not like stealing or cheating. Those people clearly support that kind of organization. And if I work with an organization that's similar, then it's a reasonable thought that they might support mine, and then I go look on their guidelines to see if that's true. I find these people while I'm out doing errands, and I notice a printing company, and I wonder if I'll ask for sponsorship support. Or I'm listening to PBS, and I find out that a funder supported a science education program that's like something else I want to do, and I'll look up that funder. And sometimes it just seems to me that they ought to support me, and I go doing my research to see if there's a way to ask them for money. And then I created this hierarchy of needs because I needed a way to explain when I worked with clients how it is that I choose which foundations to recommend that they apply to for funds. And this organization worked best for me. So if you start at the bottom of the chart, but you read from the top of the chart. So, no, wait a minute. You start at the bottom of the chart and you read from the bottom of the chart. First thing is to match your organizational mission with the funder's mission. Has to be a direct alignment. The 3 bottom rows of this all have to be dead on, perfect matches. You have to have the exact same organizational mission or intent. The words won't be exactly the same, but the priorities are. You have to have you want to serve the same location geographically and the audience demographically that the funder has named in their guidelines. And you want to have the effects or achieve the impact that the funder says in the guidelines, this is the difference we want to make. If all 3 of those things line up, then you can sort by the next 2 levels. Can you bring the type of a special quality program that they're interested in that helps you beat out the others? And then what is it about what you do that is special, that gives you an edge over anybody else? That can be a professional edge because you are the Hohogam Center and you have that stunning collection storage place. Okay, that's an edge. It could be that you have a collection that nobody else has that tells a story of a particular heritage that no one else can tell in the way you do it. That is your particular edge. Resist falling into the trap of saying you're unique, because everybody thinks they're unique. And if everyone thinks they're unique, then there's no unique doesn't apply anymore. So what is the special value that you bring to it? That's where you're going to get the grant, because everybody else who might get a grant hits those first 3 levels too. The people who don't hit those first 3 levels, they get kicked out. They're not even considered. Everybody else who gets the first 3 now has to compete on quality and edge. And that's where you get to shine about what it is that you do that's special. Okay, so this is one of the rules that I always think about and I sometimes follow for myself. But it is best practice to call a funder if they provide a telephone number. Ooh, I realized I just forgot to tell you something. See this website up here? This top one, the Foundation Center? Who knows that name, has ever been to that website? Okay. So this website, Foundation Center Online, is a searchable database of most of the foundations that are in the country. It costs $50 to have a monthly rental of it. And what I tend to do is tell people to store up all the research you want to do, buy it for a month, and use it for a month of full research rather than paying for a whole year of it. Or some colleges and universities have a foundation center library in their own library, and if you go there, you can use their database for free. And all you have to do is call up the librarian and ask, are you a foundation center library? Or you can go to the foundation center website and look for the listings of libraries. And through that, you can type in there that you're a museum or a library, the audience that you serve, all sorts of keywords about what you'd like to do. And it'll filter through that and give you a long list of the people who are appropriate. And then you can click on a name of a funder, and it'll take you to a page where you can see all the grants they've made, what part of the country they went to, how much those grants were worth, and all of that gives you an idea of whether or not you fit that same territory, and about how much money you can ask for and expect to get from them if you get a grant. So using all of that information, I then call the funder. If they've provided a phone number on their website or in the foundation center, it's okay to call them. If they leave the phone number off, that's a signal they don't want to be bothered. And we try very hard not to upset funders, so we don't call them if they don't want to be called. But if you can call them before you write a proposal, you can ask them if what you're thinking of still fits their guidelines. And so usually I'll call up and I'll say, my name is Sarah Sutton. I'm with the Lexington Historical Society. I've read your guidelines. I think we qualify. I'm interested in applying, but I'd like to ask you a couple of questions before I go ahead. Do you have time to talk to me now, or shall we set an appointment? And usually I'm going to get either a yes right now or yes, I'll set an appointment. I didn't give them an option to say no. They have to pick A or B. And then we have a short chat, and I go to the other side of this, and I say, I've looked at your guidelines, so they know it's worth spending time talking to me now, because I've already done my homework. I'm pretty sure we line up, but I have some questions, and I want to tell them about my idea. What I want to do, the difference I want to make, how I want to do that, and about how much money I'd like to ask for. Usually, try not to give them a range. If you want $15,000, say, I'd like to apply for $15,000. If they think $15,000 is too little or too much, they will tell you that. And then you'll know for when you do your final proposal. These almost always work out well for me, and every once in a while they'll say, oh, that was a good introduction. And I think, phew, okay, now we can have a good conversation. Because they talk to an awful lot of people who haven't done their homework, who don't know their project for sure, and they're hoping that the funder will tell them what to ask for. The funder has too many people to work with. You need to come in knowing what you'd like and what you think is a good match. And then they're interested in becoming your partner, and ideally you hope that this is the beginning of a long partnership and multiple grants. So it's worth having that phone call to start the relationship. If you are going to be the proposal writer, who of you will someday be the proposal writer for your agency or be called upon to do it? Or you don't know, most of you, okay. Proposal writing is finished alone, but rarely done entirely alone. And the best way I can describe this is that when my son, the one who was on the phone earlier, was 11, he had a grand mal seizure, and we ended up in the hospital. And I hadn't seen the first seizure. There were other people with him, and here we are at the hospital, and all of a sudden he starts another seizure, and I have no idea what's going on. I'm in the hallway hollering, and I run back into the room to be with him, and I look around, and there must have been 25 people in the room. And then within 3 minutes maybe, I look up, and we're down to just 3 people. And I said to the person next to me, what happened to everybody? She said, we all start off together to see who's needed, and then when our roles are finished, we just disappear. And that's sort of like getting ready to write your grant. Everybody's in the room. You're interested in doing this particular project, and you need advice and input from the rest of the folks who may be related to it or understand how it's going to work so that you're going to get a good design. Because if you forget to allow for the trash disposal for your big event in the middle of summer, that's going to be a big problem. You need to have had the people who are responsible for facilities there with you. Now, if you're the only person at your organization, you're the whole team, and hopefully you'll be able to think through all of those things. And I'm going to show you a logic model in a little bit that you can use to think through it when you don't have the rest of the team to help you. But usually, having all of these people involved means that by the time you're done designing your project, you have one that everyone will be happy you get a grant for. So the worst thing is to get the grant and then everybody to go, oh, now we actually have to do it because it was a hard project or it wasn't their idea and they weren't involved. So by involving them at the beginning, you'll make your writing process a lot easier. All right. Proposal preparation really is based on meaning. The meaning of the event, not all of the things you're going to do. And I promise you, when you write your grant, the first thing you want to do is tell the reader all the steps you're going to take, the people who will be involved, all of the actions and the activities. But the person funding it is not as interested in that as in what difference you're going to make in the world. Why does this matter? Why is this important? So the story of this particular project is that what you're looking at here is called a living shoreline. And so rather than having a solid wall here against the Chesapeake Bay, you know, with the pylons put in, a hard wall that the ocean hits against, they've created this rock wall here, and then a sand area here, and these kids are planting grass. And then back here is the land. So it's now restored as a wetland, as natural habitat, and when there's a storm surge, there isn't any damage, there's just wetland. And so the museum, the Chesapeake Bay Museum, was installing this in order to demonstrate for shore owners along the Chesapeake Bay that this is the way to manage their properties better. But it's so expensive to do all of that grass planting that they were struggling with how to make this happen. All of the children there, the youth who are there, are planting all of that grass in honor of a friend of theirs who died earlier in the year in a fire in the family home. So for all of them, this is a memorial place. It becomes a living shoreline with a different meaning. And by designing the project this way and including the community in this design, they have a grant-funded project from private foundations, individual funders, and NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So all those different types of funders got behind a project like that. They could have just said, we're building a wall so we don't have storm damage. And that's not what this project is about. So when you think about what you're asking for, and you know all the reasons that that project is important to you and your community, all of that needs to show up in the grant proposal, because that's what makes it special. That's where all of the meaning is. It's not just the things you're going to do, the stuff you're going to buy. So if we think about how to describe it to somebody, and especially if you're all alone, how to design your project, there are two things I use. One of them is a logic model, and two is a budget. And we're going to play with the logic model first. So here I'm going to show you the really complex thing. And we'll go back to that. Logic model, how many of you have heard about a logic model? There was one session earlier today that had one. I didn't use logic models for a long time because I like to think I'm really logical and I don't need help. But the Kellogg Foundation and United Way created a simple way to use a logic model, and they asked their grant recipients to use the logic model to design their projects. They didn't need to send the logic model into the funder, but they wanted them to use it as a way to organize their thoughts and to design a good program. So we're going to try that today. So this is the very complex version of a logic model. You can talk about the situation over here, or we could, just for today, we're going to ignore that one. This is all the things you put into it, the activities and the stuff. These are the outputs, the results, the products of it. The way I remember it is this outputs has a P in it, so it's the things you produce. Outcomes has a C in it, it's the things, the change that happens. So outputs, what are we going to produce? What are we going to have? What are we going to experience? And then outcomes it by creating something, creating a celebration. Inventing a celebration that we're going to use a logic model to think through. So can someone give me an example of a celebration that you go to? A wedding? Great, marvelous. Okay, so we are going to have a wedding. So what are the activities to get ready for our wedding? Planning. Okay, planning and location. Okay, so part of planning is to choose our location. We're going to break planning down a little bit. We're going to choose a location. Choose a date. Choose it. Okay, get the people in the party and invite other people. All right. Anything else we have to do? We got to find a place. We have to rent a floor. So these are all things that we have to do to organize it. You might make that really long list of all of those things. It's not just a to-do list. That's the basis for your budget and your staffing plan. Okay. So let's see. We've organized flowers, invitations. Any other activities? Oh, we better hire someone to administer this, right? Anything else we're missing for an activity to get ready? Music. Arrange for the music. So we've got, pardon? Planned, oh, we've rented the tuxes or whatever it is that we are going to have at our wedding. All right. Now that's where we get a little wobbly here. So we just rented a thing, which could be a material. So you could consider here that the flowers, that the outfits are materials. Don't let that make you crazy. Just know that you need to think about materials and activities that you go into it. So we need to rent a tent and chairs, and we need chairs and a tent. However you want to fit that in to the inputs is fine. So what else do we need for things? Are we going to eat at our event? We have to arrange for the food. Now, are we going to have somebody else make the food, or are we going to have a family gathering to prepare things? Somebody else. All right, someone else. We're going to hire someone to do that. All right. Okay. Caterers. That's why we have caterers. Let's see. If there might be travel, right? If we're getting married in a place where we're having a destination wedding, everyone has to come to Hawaii. So there will be travel involved. So those are all aspects of it. Now, what are some of the outputs that you need to think about? So we're going to, when we're having our wedding, we have a ceremony that has to happen. So we have to produce that ceremony. How many people are coming to our wedding? 100. So our participation is going to be 100 people at the wedding, but we might have 50 staff who've participated, something like that. All right? Anything else? Anything else that we're going to produce at this wedding? Married couple. Right? Yep, bingo. That is an outcome. We are going to change the status of these two people, right? Okay. Outputs, though, we have to put stuff on the table maybe, or there are decorations, or there might be something that guests take home. So those are more outputs. Anything else we're overlooking here? I don't think so. Honeymoon. Oh, okay, yeah. All right, so honeymoon has to be planned and is an event that happens afterwards. There might be the groom's dinner, or a groom family celebration beforehand, bachelor party. I don't know. There are those sorts of things that are also output. What about outcomes? We've talked about initially what we've done is change that one person, that couple has been married. That's a short-term outcome. What's a medium and a longer out-term? Kids becoming grandparents. Estate planning. We created a family. We created a new home. We have new connections. We've expanded our family because now there's if you're on the groom side, now you have the wife's side now added to your family. What happened during all that time that people are there at the wedding? Mm-hmm. People who might not have seen each other for a long time now get to see each other. People who've never met, but they've always heard that they have a second cousin 3 times removed from wherever, now they get to meet. Maybe there's an activity Maybe this is a traditional ceremony, and there are activities where elders are going to do their work because they know that the children will be around and have a chance to see it, where in regular situations that's not available to them. So you can see how outcomes tends to be way more interesting and engaging than all of that stuff in the inputs and the outputs that we usually put into our grant. So don't let your grant proposal be so much on the inputs and the outputs, but more on the outcomes, and think about what those changes will be. And then use this to go ahead and work on your budget. So your logic model can be any of those three on the list that were provided, or one that you make up. I make up a simplified version of that, and I just do it shorthand just to help myself think. The budget usually comes in their format, or one that they refer to that's part of the associated grant makers, your regional grant makers, or your community foundations format. And you have to use that, and you have to send it in to when you make the application. And you can use that as a design tool too, because it includes all those things we just talked about on the activities and the inputs side. Just like your proposal, you will do many drafts of this budget. And just like the guidelines, you will prepare it at the beginning, you'll adjust it a couple times in the middle, and you better check back at it at the end so your budget reflects what your narrative has turned out to be. How many of you prefer not to do budgets? A few, but most of you seem pretty comfortable with budgets. So I won't lurk about on this one too long, but if anybody would like to talk to me more about budgets afterwards. Just remember that a simple budget is best, and that keeping notes on where your numbers came from is critical, because that really long waiting process that you have to go through while your proposal is in, that's when you forget everything about how you figured out what this math would look like. Or if you write it and a bookkeeper is in charge of managing that, they need those notes in order to understand how you got your figures and where to take money from or where to put it. Because likely, the way it ends up in real life will be different from your budget. A funder usually doesn't get upset about that, but they need to know why it's different from the original plan. And if you have your math for coming up with the original numbers, that helps you explain where things were different. Maybe the plane flights were higher, or the price of materials was higher, or you had to send an extra person, or they had to travel from a different location because they moved between when you started the proposal and when you actually could do the project. So although budget is really important to do as well as you can, it's not something to tie yourself up in knots about, and it's definitely something you can call the funder about, whether you're in the middle of your grant writing process or the middle of your grant implementation process. If there are money questions or money problems, they want to hear early and help you with them. But for a quick review of the budget, the earned income is anything you get during the project through an activity. So you sold books, you sold tickets, you sold balloon rides, whatever, that you earned money from. Gifts and grants are contributions with no expectation of material return. So a gift usually comes from an individual, but a grant comes from another funder. So your project might require 3 different funders to make 3 grants for you to have your whole budget. And you'd list the other funders, or you'd list the amount of money you hope to get from grants as part of your budget. And then in kind, which always gets sticky, but the best simple description is, in kind is the value of something that you don't have to pay for, but you would have paid for if you couldn't find someone to give it to you. So if you need to rent the popcorn machine, and it would have cost $150 for the day, but the company gives it to you, then that $150 cost is an in-kind contribution from the company, and it can go into the budget. Examples of expenses, we talked a little bit about that. Let's see. Overhead, that's the Overhead is all of the stuff you can't put your hands on in price. So it's the cost of the lights and the air conditioning, the cost of maintenance of your entire property when you're renting out part of it. You could spend all day trying to figure that number out. It's better to have a percentage number. It's easier for you to have a percentage number. So 10% or 15% is usually a safe amount to use for a project. If I have a $100,000 project, I can usually say that $15,000 is the overhead expense of administering this project. So I'd like to ask for $115,000. That's if your funder is willing to allow payment for overhead costs, and they'll say that in their guidelines. And if they're not interested, then when you do your math about your income, their request, the $10,000 that you're asking from them can't show up at all over on the overhead expense side. It has to be attributed directly to a different kind, a concrete project, like paying a salary or paying a project leader, that sort of a thing. And if you have questions about that, please call and talk to them. So how much do you ask for? Well, you ask for what you need. You don't inflate the budget dramatically in hopes that when they give you less, you'll get the amount you want. You put in that cushion for what you need, and you identify the cushion, and you ask them for as much money as you need. They don't want to be tricked. They don't want to be hoodwinked. They want to know that the math you're using is real math. So when let's say I have a $50,000 project, and my funder is likely to give me $25,000, I'm going to have to find other funders to contribute. There's no guarantee that they will give me money or that they will give me as much as I ask for. It's possible they'll take 5 or 10 off my request and still ask me to go ahead and produce this project for them, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's the money they have available to give me. So I always design my proposals to be exactly what I need money for, honestly. Then I find more funders with the capability of giving me more money than I need to run that project, and I ask them all for money. And when I'm asked to describe whom else am I asking for money, so when I'm applying to funder A and they say, who else are you asking? I will say, I'm asking funder A for $25,000 and these 2 other funders for whatever I'm going to ask them. But I always have an extra funder that I'm also asking for money. My funder might not know all of the people I'm going to request to, and I might not know yet, but they'll know exactly what the true cost is and what their portion, what their contribution is, and the kinds of other people I'm looking for money from. But you might find, let's say you've got a project you want to start on January 1st, and on December 31st, you've funded it to 80%. You may choose to wait until you get that other 20% later on in the new year, to run your project. Or you may choose to run your project at 80% capacity if that's possible, and go ahead on January 1st. Always tough calls, always a conversation you have with leadership, and it's a natural part of fundraising. And if you're ever stuck and wondering, you call the funder. And then once in a while, you ask all of those funders, and they all come in and you have more money than you needed for the grant. What do you think you do? You call the last guy in and you tell them, we've fully funded our project and we received your check afterwards. When you call them, you know exactly what you want to do with their money before you talk to them. And you say, I have 2 options. I can return the money to you, or I could use it for my project in this way, by making the project larger, by replicating it, putting it in another location, by adding something that's related but you hadn't asked for, and now the funder has a choice. But they've been through this process of vetting you and the type of work you want to do, and they already like you. And they've allocated these funds for you, and they've moved on to the next topic. So they're very, very likely to give you that money. But they need to know what it's going for. So when you call them, you make sure you have a good offer. All right. Any questions about asking and amounts? And you remember, you know how to find your amount by looking at the size of gifts that they've made to other folks. You can go a little over that if you want, if you're feeling like you have a really strong connection, but the first time you ask a funder for money, I wouldn't go outside of their usual request range. Okay, and making data for your case. You might have a really great story, a really well-designed project, but you need to come up with some background information to convince them why you're the one. Some people are motivated by money, some people are motivated by stories, some people are motivated by photographs, and you don't know who's in your reading group, on the peer review group or at the foundation who's looking at your proposal, and you don't know what it is that motivates them. So you need a little bit of everything in there so that the reader can make a connection and feel solid in the information you've given them. So this picture here on the right is sort of the way I go about research for doing a grant project, is what kind of information do I have? What matters? Where can I find it? And I go through a discovery phase of collecting everything. And when I have that, I'm ready to sit down and write. After I've talked to all of my staff members about what the project design is, I've talked to the funder, after I get all of this data, then it's time to write, but not till I've done all of that groundwork. The comments about independent sector, that's a great place to go to find a quote for if you want to calculate mileage and what is the acceptable rate for mileage, independent sector will have a number for your state and the previous year. The same thing for valuing volunteer contributed hours. You can put a cash amount on that, and independent sector will have that number that's appropriate for your state in order to value someone's time. And then that can be part of your grant budget. And one comment here, see the bottom part about getting stories. Your stories matter, but other people's story matter as well. That third person endorsing your idea or saying the same thing in an unrelated situation gives you that third-party endorsement that your issue matters, and you're not the only ones who think it's important. So finding those ways to weave that into your writing is important. One of the easiest ways is either to get a quote out of the newspaper and cite it in your proposal, or to speak to somebody that's important to you and likely has credibility with the funder and ask permission to quote them in your grant application. And then you do. You say, whoever the person is, you give their name and title and their quote, and you say the date that you had the conversation or the conditions under which you had that conversation, and it brings some extra credibility to it. So now I'm going to go on to the writing part. I find that I can't write in the same place that I get organized and design a project. I can edit where I organize my project, but the writing is a creative thing that requires me to be in a space that's creative or at least uncluttered. So this is my coffee shop in Haleiwa, and I do a lot of writing there. I do it out at the beach. I do it in somebody else's office, because when I'm in someone else's office, I have no chores or responsibilities there, and my head is clear for writing and organizing. I usually start the document as a bulletin board. I let other people contribute it. If you are the kind of person who uses Google Docs or some other electronic means of sharing a document, you can post the document up and let other people drop their ideas into it, or you can hand them a paper and let them edit it. But at first, everything gets dumped into my bulletin board of a grant. I usually go in and I find all the questions that I have to answer, and I put them in my Word document, numbered, and then anything I think that's related to that, I drop into those sections and begin to create an outline of what my grant looks like, and then I start refining it. It becomes what I call a drafty draft when it's mostly written, but there are holes that I need somebody else to fill, and I can send it off to them, and I'd say the yellow section under number 2 needs information from last year's school groups. I haven't had an update. And then they know that all they have to do is fill in a number. They don't have to rewrite my whole proposal or take on the whole thing. It's just a simple job. I usually get a response back a little more quickly. And as for the valleys of the shadow of death, if it's a big grant project like a federal grant, an IMLS grant, twice during the writing, I will think to myself, what was I thinking? This project has grown out of control. This is a bad idea. We can't get it done in time. My writing is terrible. It was just horrible things. And that happens twice. But the good thing is now I know it's coming. And I see the first one, I start to feel bad. It's like, okay, this means that I'm getting to the point where I have a lot of good material. And I'm just feeling overwhelmed by all of it. And I just have to go back to organizing it and working through it, sharing it with other people. Give it time. Sometimes I do have to walk away and leave it alone and then come back and I'm much more clear. In a regular foundation grant, a normal size 3 to 5 page application, I usually only have one Valley of the Shadow of Death, but it almost always happens. And then these are the things I think are most important about writing. We talked about meaning before. We talked about activities versus outcomes. Benefits more important than features. So the features are those activities and those inputs. And the benefits are those outcomes, those changes. How is the world better or this situation better because what you did? That's what you lead with in your phone call. It's what you lead with in your writing. That's how you engage your reader in order to write a check for you, to become part of your partner. I say you should read it out loud to yourself, but I've been listening to my voice for 50 years now, and I'm a little tired of it. And so I need to have somebody else read it quietly or out loud and give me feedback on it. And I always remind myself that I would rather have their feedback on how to make my proposal better than I'd like to have the funder's feedback with a no. I want to get the bad news in fast so that I can make changes. Now, I've been writing grants for 25 years, and I'm hoping that the current grant that I wrote to work on a project for myself, I will get a yes. But I have written 3 other grants in my lifetime for me, and I've gotten none of them. And I believe that is because I am too close to my topic. That's why I'm a grant writer for other people, because I'm outside and I can look at it a little more, I can look at it more like a funder, yeah. And that's why it's helpful. So when you are writing your own story and your own project, having somebody else outside of your office, outside of immediately next to your work, will help you explain it better or be more clear or include all the parts that are important. Because when we get into what we love, it's hard to share it in the way that it needs to be done for somebody who doesn't love it as much as we do. And please do use your conversational voice. If you are writing as you think the reader believes a proposal writer should speak, then you're going to tie yourself up in knots and it'll be a mess of a grant. It is better to write in your own voice. Now, there are some government agencies where they want to see some government language in there. Fine, put that in there. But your whole text doesn't need to sound like a government document. They're tired of reading them as well. So give them what they need, but then use your own language, your own story in order to explain what's going on or what you're interested in. I have a couple books I like to recommend. This one, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, honest to goodness, is a hysterical book about commas and punctuation. And I read it twice, and I laughed hysterically the second time I read it out loud. So I really encourage you to at least look at some of this. Get the book out from the library, read a little bit, and understand that punctuation actually matters, which is why I say in all of my grant contracts that I do not proofread my own work, because I can't. Someone else needs to be the proofreader. And then the other book I like is Writing for a Good Cause. And these should be on that handout that you have, my favorite books. I read this when I get stuck and I'm tired of hearing my voice and that all my grants start to sound the same, or I just can't get excited, maybe, about writing one morning. If I read these books, it primes the pump, it gives me new language to use, it reminds me why we do the work that we do and that I want to write better in order to fund cool projects. So this is the other one I use. But reading good books on history, talking to other people, all of that helps you use language better, use language more creatively instead of whittling yourself down to fewer and fewer words, and it makes your work come out better. And then when you're really, really stuck, leave your desk, leave your office, go out and walk around. Look at things that have nothing to do with your grant writing project, or look at things that do and the way other people do it differently. It might add something to the design of your project and make it turn out to be a better proposal. All right, let's spend a couple minutes on these federal grants. Actually, maybe what I'll do is pause on this. How many of you have a federal grant in your future? IMLS? Awesome. Okay, we will spend time on this. If you're applying for the Native American or Native Hawaiian grant approach, far simpler than a Museums for America or a National Leadership grant. So go for the library or the museum's approach for Native American, Native Hawaiian first. Get practice. Talk to the staff members. They are awesome. They won't read your proposal, but they will answer all of your questions and they'll talk to you about your idea. You absolutely need to start as far ahead as you can. Now it's only 6 weeks, I think, until the proposals come in. You could still make it work. And there are two ways to look at it. Could I get it done in that enough time? I'm not sure. Maybe if I act as if I will, I'll get far enough along to submit it, or I'll have practice designing and organizing this process so that next year when I start 3 months ahead, I'll be better off. There's no wasted time on a grant proposal, because it helps you practice organizing your ideas, you get material written, you think about projects. It's all practice that's important. And even when you get a no, it's not a waste, because hopefully the funder has sent you, like IMLS, they'll send you the reviewer's opinions. So you have some information about what they were thinking, what they liked and didn't like. It doesn't always hold over to the next project and the next application, but it's more information about how to do a grant proposal to the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Let's see. If you've written a grant to a foundation and you've gotten a no, you can call them up. I usually wait a couple days so I'm a little less prickly, and I call them. And I say, my name is Sarah Sutton, I'm from the Lexington Historical Society. We applied for $10,000 for blah blah in the last go-round and we're unsuccessful. Do you have time to talk to me now, or shall we make an appointment about how my next proposal can be more competitive? And then you get feedback. Every once in a while they say, no, we don't give explanations. It's like, oh. Then they fall to the bottom of my funding list because they don't want to be my partner. They don't want to bring me along. They're not engaged. Maybe later when we are awesome and fully funded, they'll be interested again, but I'm going to leave them to the side for now and work on other folks who are more interested in me. Contacting partners early on. I've been to a couple of sessions where talking about, Tim was part of those, where they have long-standing partnerships, and this is very easy to create a grant together and to get letters of support and that sort of thing. But if you're using a grant to start a partnership, that's where making sure that you contact the partners early on to design well together really matters. Not just to get a support letter, but to have designed that grant well with the whole team that was part of it. And then plan to submit at least 3 days ahead, because everybody else submits on the day of. Sometimes the system crashes and then there is likely no mercy. So, and along with the 2 valleys of the shadow of death, there's the 3 glitch rule, which comes about when you're submitting electronically. 3 things will happen. They won't all be electronic, but something will happen. So I take all of those attachments and I put them in a file folder on the, my desktop screen, and I open the online system and I start filling in the blanks and attaching documents. And somewhere along the way I realized that I forgot that gosh darn 150-word abstract, or that I didn't format the trustees list in the way that they want. You find that something's off and you need that time in order to fix it, in order to submit calmly. And I usually submit with a buddy, and I will read the list and I'll say, okay, we need a PDF of the abstract. And she says, okay, PDF of the abstract. She puts it on, looks at it, sees that it came out properly, and we move on to the next one. The buddy system is really good when you're down to crunch time. I usually find that if one person's stressed, the other one's calm, and it reverses. So let's see. This is online fill-in-the-blank forms is really for the foundations that have gone from writing a letter application to doing your application online. And it's not that complex. Follow the instructions, talk to the staff. But one thing they say is that please remember to write your proposal as a proposal on a Word document so that it flows like a proposal, even though it's answering the questions in the form. And then you can cut and paste and drop it into the form. Because if you just answer the form questions, it reads all chopped up, and you don't get as good a proposal. And so the little voice in your head says, well, then why use that approach? And that's because the grant software designers create those forms, not the foundations. And that system is what's available now. It will improve. But so in the meantime, that's what we do to help them. And if you're applying to IMLS, and you haven't done DUNS, which is find your DUNS number, I can't remember what it is, and establish grants.gov, do that before you leave the conference. Get it set up, and then start working on your grant application. The IMLS website will have all of that listed with a very good how-to to do it. And I think that's it. Every proposal matters, but you won't get them all. There's always the next one to do. I strive for having 75% success rate. If I'm down at 50%, either I'm working with an organization that hasn't asked for money before, or we're looking in the wrong places. And then I have to redo my research. And if I'm up at 95%, it means I'm not looking in enough places, and I need to broaden where we go looking for money. So 75% is your goal, and always celebrate the yeses. I usually dance in the kitchen, but there's always some sort of celebration for the yeses. And no, you just make a phone call and find out what you do better next time. So with that, I'm going to finish. Well, thank you all for coming, and I'm happy to talk with you about questions. We'll probably have to migrate outside.